not my problem anymore if you don't want to record the lecture. And I will, start the presentation. Okay, so theorizing the urban. By theorizing, I mean I put this word here, theory, in the beginning, because that's basically the primary concern of what could be called urban sociology or urban studies, because we all know, as people, like many of us live in the cities. Those who do not live in the city, they visited the city at least once. Actually, it's not something, this privilege of being an urban dweller or visiting the city is not something everyone who lives on the planet has, but the number of people who are actually somehow connected to the cities is growing. And of course, meaning that most of the people know a lot about cities. We live in them, we use them, we work, we travel. But what urban sociology does, and more broadly urban studies, they are concerned with creating some notions, understanding, and theory about how cities work. And today we're going to talk about how is it done, and we will, have an outline of our plans, how we're going to be doing it in this course. We already did the introductions. Then we're going to talk, why do we study cities? Then we're going to talk about the structure of the course. And of course, as in the end of every lecture, you will have the questions for the seminar. So why do we study cities? And the second question is why urban studies are not about cities. I would like to read or hear your answers to these questions. How do you think, why do we need to study cities? Why not, I don't know, study the whole global world, for example? Why there is this sphere of urban studies? You can use chat, or you can, yeah.
I think that a lot of people in nowadays live in the cities, so it's very important to make these places safety, comfortable for people. So it is because of this, I think we need to study urban and cities.
And also,
I believe that I believe that it's the reason why to study cities, because the cities have their own probably atmosphere and its culture, which is forming for the time that the cities are existed. So maybe if to study all the world, it wouldn't be possible to see some differences between this group of people in the cities, and that's why it's interesting to study.
And as a city are like smaller units of the world, so it's important to study cities to understand countries, and then consequently to understand the whole world in general.
Any other ideas? But what about the second question? Why studying cities is not about cities that much? Or maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think that you're right, because cities, like, they are not about cities. They are about people who are living in those cities. So I think urban studies and sociology of like cities, of urban sociology, is more about how do people live in this city, and how city influence on us.
More ideas? You can also write them. Space. Oh, this is a crucial word. Yes. Please read the answers in the chat as well. So Vlada is highlighting the context of inequality, and Daria is highlighting that we're talking about space. This is super important. Yes, like a smaller unit of a larger system. Okay, these are just like open questions we are not be able to answer ever, but I really liked your idea, so I wrote, maybe I did not write all of them, I'm sorry, but from what I heard and read, you're super right about the concentration and the number of people who live in the cities. So basically, now half of the global population lives in what is considered to be cities, and this number is growing. So the process of urbanization, it started, when do you think urbanization started? And why? Why do we have cities? How do you think? Okay, yeah, okay. 18th century, yes. So the crucial thing with why cities emerged is not the time, actually, because 19th century is correct answer if we're talking about the Western world. But what we have seen in recent decades in China is also massive urbanization due to industrialization, but it happened way later. So there is no exact date when did the urbanization start, because the date we know from the textbooks is very like Western oriented vision of what is the city. But usually, sorry, I'm stepping a bit like far away from the topic, but I will come back. But you know, there is this classic story of urbanization, which usually is told on the case of Manchester, where there is classic example of industrialization, which was followed by urbanization. But this is just, you know, like one example and like super Western example, because what we are now seeing in many places in Central Africa is the same process which happened in Western world in 18th century. But I mean, you're right, but it's more important to pay attention that the urbanization is connected to industrialization than to tie urbanization to some concrete time. Yeah, but anyway, what I was saying is that 50%, more than 50% of global population is living in the cities, and this number is growing, and it's expected to grow. However, as we know, you know, there is no sorry, I can't say this word even in Ukrainian, teleology. So there is no process in history that there is some straight line. There is no like exact destiny for our society. Maybe some of you don't know this term. I will send it. So teleology is not about theology. It's not connected to God or anything. It's a type of belief that there is an expected aim in the way history goes. For example, Christianity is a teleological belief, meaning that Christians expect that there is an end when Jesus comes. Orthodox Marxism is also a teleological belief, because Orthodox Marxists believe in certain destiny for the world, and there is a communism in the end. So a lot of sociological theories, old sociological theories, they were teleological, but we cannot expect this to be true. And why I'm telling this? Because if now we see that the urbanization is going on from year by year, cities are growing, it does not mean that it will be so in the next decade, especially as we have seen the last year such drastic change in mobility, in the way societies are organized in our everyday lives. But yeah, anyway, so what I was saying is that urban studies emerged because the cities are growing. This is like very basic idea, but it's something we have to admit, and it's something which brings to way more different concentration of people in the same space, which changes the quality of our everyday life. Like your everyday life as it was, not yours, but people's everyday life as it was during the feudal era, it was completely different to what we have now, when we all have to live in a relatively small boxes. Also, as we are talking, you know, we're still talking about the pandemic. The fact that we live in the cities in such a high concentration is one of the reasons such crises could emerge. So now we have to learn that we need to distance ourselves, because we are so used to live so much close together. Your other ideas that I really liked what you said. It's also like something we as a sociologist or like social researchers, we know that cities are about people. But for a long, long time, cities were, and it's still a lot like this, that urban development of the city is a sort of a sphere which architects and urban planners take care of. So there are a lot of urban projects which were designed completely by engineers. Actually, Soviet cities are probably one of the best examples of this super modern, super rational architectural vision of a city, which sort of, I mean, it might be depending on which architecture style you like, you can like or dislike one or the other architecture. But the point is that for decades, social aspect of urban development was sort of not present that much. Architects, planners, they were those who ruled this whole process. And actually, urban studies emerges as a critique of this approach when you have engineers constructing social life by the way they plan the city. So that's the other aspect, which is sort of visible, so obvious for us, but for a lot of architects still who study architecture, they are not used to even think about that when they build an apartment block, they're actually people who are going to live there. And as my field is urban studies, I worked a lot with architects, and it's like a perpetual conflict with them when they see the same things I see, but they see them as engineers. And when I have a completely different vision of it. Like, I do not see, for example, housing as something ugly or beautiful. I do not see it as like in terms of style, colors, etc. I don't really care about that much, but I see people who are going to live there. And when you talk to architects, sometimes it's like so difficult to understand each other, though you work on the same sort of physical objects. Yeah, another point you mentioned is that cities exist in context of inequalities, and that's very much connected to what was mentioned before, to the fact they cities represent on a very small scale like the whole global world. Because if we are talking about feudal era, okay, it was also quite unequal, but at least you could not see, as people were not concentrated that much in the space, you could not see how close, how unequal are people who could live super close. I don't know if you have seen that movie Parasites. Uh, it won like a lot of awards. Anyway, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I enjoyed it, but there is a lot of violence there. Anyway, in this movie, you could see. I will send you the link, but I would not. I would not watch it in the evening because there is a lot of violence and blood there. But depends on what you like. Anyway, in that movie Parasites, director shows really well how in the urban context, in the urban space, people who are so unequal can live super close to each other. And yeah, and the last point you mentioned is space. This is actually like super crucial notion for the whole field of urban sociology and urban studies, because apart from urban studies, apart from emerging as a criticism towards the architectural only vision of the city, it also emerges as a sort of spatial turn in the social studies. What I mean by that is that a lot of theories you have learned during your studies as a sociologist were, for example, they were about inequalities. I don't know, that there is this group of people, there is this group of people, there is working class, whatever, but which is, do you still hear me? Sorry. In love with online class. Okay, so tell me, on which idea did you lose me? Like, when did the connection drop? What was the last thing I was saying? Or you don't remember? Or you don't listen at all? Hey. Am I alone here, people? Okay. Don't remember. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, inequality. By the way, is it like my English? Is it okay for you? I mean, I suppose it's gonna be okay because I have quite a strong Slavic accent, so it's not sort of super perfect English, which is difficult to understand. Okay, conflict between me and architects. Good. So, yeah. I think I will continue with the conflict between sociologists and architects. The problem is that architects, they often see the same sort of things, spatial things. We see from a completely different view, but we often have to work together. If there is a parking lot to design, we need a sociologist. I don't know why I started with parking lot, but anyway, if there is a sociologist who needs to count how many cars are there in the housing block, there is also an architect who just like looks on how, not only but often architect looks on the same space as an engineer, and we have to work together, and sometimes it's difficult. So what I meant by this story about constant conflict between sociologists and architects is that field of urban studies actually emerged as an answer to this very engineering orientated vision of cities and spaces we live. And yeah, about inequalities, why it's important to see cities, like cities give you the photograph of the global inequality. And I mentioned the movie Parasites. I will send you the link to it. It's a great movie, but a bit violent. And it shows really well, like visually, how in the same space you can have people with like super different income and like super different even like everyday life and space which surrounds them. And the last point is that literally, like quite literally, urban studies put sociology in space. So for example, if as a traditional sociologist, we have a data set about inequality in our cities. For example, we made an online survey of people who live in Lviv, and we asked them, what is your income? I don't know, how much property do you have? Like, how do you spend your money? And based on these indicators, we created like 5 groups of Lvivians, who are like super rich and who are like super poor. And we have this perfect table which explains us that that Lviv is quite an unequal city. But what an urban sociologist would do, urban sociologist would also put a question in this survey like, where do you live? And based on that, he would or she would make a map showing that, for example, people with higher income, they live in the suburbs, and people with lower income, they live in the city center. And based on that, he or she would say, that probably we need to stimulate the development of the city center. I'm speculating. I don't have such data. Or I don't know, probably we need to invest more in Sihiv district to sort of to develop the poorer community. So the idea of spatial analysis is like the core for urban studies. And basically, often we're doing the same things, like in studying cities, we're doing the same things when we're doing like traditional, non-spatial, sociological, social research, but we just add the aspect of space. But this is like super general talk about urban studies, and I'm gonna start more concrete part of the lecture. And the next slide is, on the next slide you can see 3 quotes from people who are considered to be urban sociologists or human geographies. Human geography, by the way, human geography is what in Ukrainian is called соціальна географія. It's not, because in English you do not have like social geography, you have human geography, like geography of people. But in Soviet tradition, they call the same study like social geography, which does not correspond to the human geography. So if you do not know what is human geography, very generally human geography is социальная география. Yeah. So,
Alona, could you please share your screen?
Oh, okay. Yeah, but you have.
Yeah, you just did it this time, and I saw that.
Yeah, sorry, just a second. Sure. Okay. Yeah. So I just brought up these quotes to answer the question of why do we study cities. So the first quote, please read it. I'm not going to read it. You all have it in front of your eyes. The first quote is from Brenner and Schmidt. It's actually super, like when I just started being into urban studies, this was like a super popular article. It came out in 2014 and everyone was like, have you seen that article? It sort of turned around the whole understanding of urban studies. It did not, but it was like quite it's quite a known article because it was the first article which very directly stated that urbanization has become a planetary phenomenon. What they mean by it is that when one city grows, probably the other city shrinks. So even if we're talking about rural areas, even if we are talking about shrinking cities, we're still talking about urbanization elsewhere. To extend on this idea, to make it clear, for example, when people are moving, I don't know, from Rivne or Ternopil to Lviv, Rivne is losing the citizens. So if we just take like a general look, we would say that, okay, Lviv is being urbanized and Rivne is not. But what Brenner and Schmidt say that no, it's actually completely the other way around, because Rivne is shrinking because Lviv is growing. And they show this process on sort of a global scale where they say that maybe 50 years ago, there were still some isolated islands of space somewhere, for example, in some rural areas in Africa or Asia, where people were not connected to these global processes of constant exchange between different cities. They say that now it's not like that at all, and I tend to agree with this idea, but also it's quite debatable because, you know, you can go to Carpathian Mountains and find some rural groups there where people live maybe completely without being connected to the train. Like, still, I mean, I don't know, but probably even in Ukraine, there are some villages where people mostly live from the agricultural work and they barely buy some products, and they do not really travel, do not have pavement and radio, and even radio. So the idea is debatable, but it's quite a prominent idea in urban studies, which brings us to the point which I mentioned before, that if we study cities, we do not actually study city as it is. So, for example, when we study migrants in Lviv, we also consider that they are actually coming from Rivne, or I don't know, maybe not from Rivne, maybe from some village. So we're not studying a group, we're studying a process. And for urban studies, it's first of all a spatial process. For those who were not super patient during the lecture, space is prostor, not the cosmos, okay? Because I had issues with this. So for those who do not speak Ukrainian, in Ukrainian there's like two words which, so space has two meanings in Ukrainian which are like completely opposite. So we're not talking about cosmos, we're talking about prostor. I had to say it in the beginning, but yeah. Okay, so urbanization is a planetary phenomenon, meaning it's a process which represents on a spatial scale, maybe super local spatial scale, global processes. For me, the most interesting example of this process of urbanization as a planetary process or phenomena is these Italian shops in Lviv. So, you know, there's this like small kiosks with Italian food, which when I moved to Lviv, for me, it was like super weird. Like, why do you have Italian? Because in Kiev, in other cities in Ukraine, I never seen those Italian shops. And I mean, they do not look like shops in Italy. They look like some quite shitty kiosks, and you do not know what's like, and you go in and you have like really good Italian food there. So for us, it's clear. I mean, for those who live in Lviv, and when I moved to Lviv, I also realized that these shops are started by people who used to live and work in Italy, and then they collected some money, and then they came back to Ukraine and started this small business. So this small part of space, of like urban space, this like small Italian shop, represents quite a complicated history of Ukrainian migration to Italy, for example. So that's what we mean when we say that urbanization is a global phenomenon. Yeah, we see a shop, but this shop is here because of quite a crazy story of how in 90s a lot of people lost jobs in Ukraine, and Italy was looking for cheap manual labor, and Ukrainian, also very importantly women, became that labor. Anyway, I'm not teaching migration anymore. So so the second quote is from Said, and it's what we actually already talked about, so I'm not going to develop a lot of it. That urban landscape integrates poverty with wealth. So yeah, we also mentioned it, that if before, okay, society was unequal, urbanization actually brought it together in the same space and very probably widened it, but it's another question. Widened it, розширило. Yeah, and Saskia Sassen, great Dutch / British / American environment. I mean, she does everything, but the last lecture I've heard from her, she was talking about environmental issues. She has this great article, which will be available on the CMS platform, which basically explains us why we need to study cities. And she highlights how cities concentrate the social contradictions, not only inequalities themselves, but the contradictions, political, ideological, racial, gender contradictions, etc. And yeah, I'm continuing with the same article of Sassen. No, I'm continuing with Saskia Sassen, but it's another article where she argues that as cities are concentrating a lot of social issues and contradictions, they have to be more in focus as the case studies, as the object of study. So she introduces us to this debate, like what to study. She says that, okay, nation states are like most common object of studies we have in social research. If you want to study, I don't know, whatever, ideology, you want, like, political ideology, you do not even question yourself on which scale to do it. You will do it on nation state scale. Like, it seems for us so natural to study nation states, but Saskia Sassen argues that, like, probably, I mean, she does not say probably, she's quite direct, that we need to change our focus on the city and the surrounding metropolitan region. Metropolitan region is the same meaning as agglomeratia in Ukrainian. It's, I mean, we also say metropolny region. Oh, this sounds so weird in Ukrainian. Anyway, so city and the surroundings. It's, I mean, it's a debate. As I'm presenting you this article, I would say that I really support this idea of studying more urban scale than the nation scale. However, you know, it really much depends on the topic, of course, because as I mentioned, the topic of ideology, of course, it makes sense to study political ideology on the nation state level, because we're talking about national structures, political structures and institutions. But when we're talking about inequality, for example, okay, you know, like we can talk about countries like US or Russia, which have quite, on the national level, they have quite a good GDP. GDP is blah, blah, blah. Sorry, maybe I'm translating you some basic words, you know. But yeah, I'm doing it on the experience of, I mean, I cannot see your eyes, you know, because when I'm seeing people's eyes when I give lecture in English, and I can see someone is like, what is she saying? I explain it, but now I'm just explaining everything which could be confusing. Sorry if These are like super easy for you. But GDP is probably someone didn't know. Anyway, so for example, if we take such countries as US, USA, and Russia, they have quite a high GDP on the national level. And based on this indicator, we can say like, oh, these countries are like doing really well economically. They have like a lot of money. But if we go a bit down on the urban, even on the regional scale, not touching urban scale, we will see how crazily unequal are regions in Russia, because like Moscow and you see, I don't know, and like Krasnodar, for example. Okay, I don't know anything about Russian regions. Yeah, I mean, but we can even talk about Ukraine, because like living in Ukraine and living in Kiev and living in Lviv is something, Odessa is something completely different from living in a small village where you do not even have like proper internet connection. And maybe on the general scale, you can see some nice number that, oh, Ukrainian GDP is growing, but the question is, where is it growing? Is it growing like in Kiev and in the central business district of Kiev, or is it growing, on the regional level where the whole region develops? So I think it's always good, even if we study processes on the nation state level, it's very important to keep this, small thing in mind that, but we need to always ask the question, but like, where is this number? Is it in one certain place, or is it redistributed spatially? This article of Saskia Sassen is not obligatory for reading. It's an additional material, but I really motivate you to take a look at it, because it's an important debate which makes you think like, where are actually the processes we are reading the books about? Where is globalization? Where is inequality? Where is, development, economic development, etc.? So, yeah. And in this course, apart from discussing city as a global phenomenon, we, as you have seen from the syllabus, we have a special focus on post-socialist cities, even more post-socialist, because we are going to talk about post-Soviet cities, but we will use literature from post-socialist cities. Guess why? Because the research on such countries as Ukraine, Belarus, even Russia is so poor that we have to engage theories from Poland and Hungary, which sounds quite sad, but that's the way it is. Unfortunately, like, I would like to give you good articles written about Ukraine and Ukrainian cities, but they just do not exist. But probably it's a challenge for you to write them at some point in your life. But yeah, so we're going to focus on post-socialist cities, meaning that we read articles about Budapest and try to apply it to Lviv. Crazy, but that's sort of, situation we're in, because actually this course is one of the first courses on urban sociology in Ukraine, and it's the first course in English in Ukraine, so welcome. Yeah, like when I was, I have time for personal stories. So when I was doing my PhD in Milan, as you know, I came to my home university, which is Taras Shevchenko, Kiev National, whatever, I don't know how, Shevchenko, or we call it KNU. It's a big university in Kiev for those who are not from Ukraine. Anyway, so I came back to my sociology department to have some coffee with my professors. And we were having coffee, and they were like, oh, so you're doing a PhD? What is it about? And I'm like, yeah, I'm like studying housing and in like housing inequalities and the housing market, and they were just like, but it's not sociology. So for a lot of like Ukrainian sociologists, studying like urban studies is something which is not sociology. So that's why we're quite far away from like having very detailed analysis of what's going on in Ukrainian cities. But it means that you have a lot of, but it means that if you write me an essay, you know, about your city, and you will say that, you know, in my city, everything is just like perfect. We have the best mayor, the best policies, the best. I will not have information to compare with. I will not be able to show some research and say like, look, this research says that you're wrong. So you can speculate about your cities, where are you from, especially if they're small cities, because I don't know anything about them. So you have this whole space. Of course, I'm joking. Don't lie to me. I can check at least the data you're using. I can check in sources. So talking about post-socialist cities, still there is not like a strong tradition of studying post-socialist cities, but there is a tradition of, in generally, of post-communist or post-socialist studies. And I would say that there is like two veins of theory how to understand what happened in our region. And the first one is, I mean, it's not so called, it's actually called transitology. I'm sure you've heard this notion of transition, that we are, I mean, Ukraine, Belarus, that we're transiting from some, I don't know, communist to there is this, I saw this article saying that like Ukraine transitioned from communism to democracy. And it was like, it looked like so funny, because like communism is like an ideology and democracy is a type of regime. And like, how can you transit from communism to democracy? It's like transiting from like apple to a banana. Anyway, but this tradition is quite strong when when Ukraine and other post-Soviet countries are presented as some underdeveloped countries which have to transit to some better, perfect, of course, Western world, or envision of other people to like Ruski Mir or whatever. So this idea of like Ukraine being this like small daughter, as you have noticed from my voice, I consider this approach quite colonial, like, because Ukraine is, I mean, not only Ukraine, this approach of like colonial view on some poorer countries, less economically developed countries, is quite common. That we see like Western countries is like perfect example, and then we say like, you know, you have to do what, you know, US does or Germany does, and then everything will be so cool. I'm quite critical of this view. So what we're gonna do is to try to be more like, to think globally and to see Ukraine as a part of global context, and to see Ukrainian cities as integrated, as not some sort of underdeveloped countries, but as countries which have their place, yes, quite a peripheral place in the global economy. Consequently, Ukrainian cities, yes, being dependent maybe on some global actors, but not underdeveloped, developed to the level where they are and to the position which they have. Probably what I'm saying now is not super clear, but please do not expect me to like tell you stories about the best practices in Vienna or whatever. I spent my, as you know, I got my master and my Ph.D. in Belgium and Italy. And I'm quite fed up of this, like, oh, we're now gonna show you people from outside of EU our best practices, and you're just like, what? because I mean, I'm not just bullshitting about my Western professors. I'm saying that it's very important to first of all know the context and then try to apply some changes, because often this like transitology vision is very uncritical to the local context. For example, there is some nice policy in Vienna, and that's true. Like, Vienna is an amazing city which has a lot of great policies which make life of people way easier. But when you just like, without research, without thinking, without understanding the local context, say like, oh, you have this in Vienna, you have to have this in Lviv. This is very risky sort of strategy, but we're going to talk about this way more. And I will quickly run through the structure of the course. You already have seen the syllabus. So, I mean, or if you didn't, please take a look at it. So, yeah, our first two topics today and the next class will be quite theoretical. For next seminar, I will ask you to watch a documentary. So no readings, yay, no readings for the first week. It's still summer, but this documentary, I think it's 2 hours long. Unfortunately, it's in a quite bad quality, but it's online, like you can stream it for free. Bad quality, and it's in Turkish with English subtitles. So you will still need to read. So it's a lie that you're not going to read. You will need to read the subtitle. It's a great documentary about Istanbul. So you also see how I'm trying to start not with some articles about perfect Western cities, but to go to Turkey, which is, I mean, maybe for some of you it's quite a known context, but it's not Western context, maybe quite similar to Ukraine, maybe not. That's going to be the question to answer. Next, second topic, we will be quite theoretical. We're going to come back to the question how cities emerged. Read very historical and philosophical piece of Henri Lefebvre. And then David Harvey. So if you guys did not know whose face is on our chat on Facebook, no, it's not my granddad and not my boyfriend. It's David Harvey, and we're going to read a lot of his texts. Can you see this huge book? I don't know if you see me. So we're not going to read this whole book, but it's like one of the thickest books he has. We're going to read small pieces, so don't worry. But I'm a big fan of David Harvey, as actually any person who does urban studies. So if you never heard about him, for you, you will. Great author. Then we're gonna come, so from very abstract topics, we will come back to space, talk about processes of gentrification, talk about housing, have an invited lecture from researcher from CEDOS at some point. We will talk about urban politics and, of course, cultural life. So first 10 topics will be about cities in general, and the last block will be on post-socialist cities. So we will first go through the main approaches to how cities are started. Most of them are actually not sociological. So we're going to do cultural studies, political studies, human geography, and just a bit of sociology. Maybe not what you expected, but that's, I mean, okay, the course is Urban Sociology, but I wanted to present you that there is a lot of things besides sociology. But even, I don't know, okay, what I mean by cultural studies, we're gonna read Barthes, but I think when you studied sociology of culture with Halina, you read Barthes or Benjamin, or so these are like the same nice people you probably read in some other courses. And we will end with the block on post-socialist cities. That's the plan, but please, so I wrote today some topics you mentioned. For example, I think, I don't remember who that is, but you said that you want to talk, that you expect such topics as like historical heritage, super important topic. I will include it at some point. Also, you talked about architecture, for sure. We cannot escape talking about architecture when we're talking about cities. And I think Roman mentioned that it's also would be nice to talk about regions. Yes, yes, and yes, because we're not, so we're talking about not cities that much, but like space and regions, not only inside of one country, also like regions on the global scale are important focus for us. For as in any other course, I mean, I'm not changing the format that much. So by the next Wednesday, by Wednesday, so we have seminar on, oh my God, I can't stop mixing Tuesday and Thursday. So next Thursday, we have our seminar, which means by Wednesday morning, I'm expecting your written answers to the questions you have on the screen. The link to the documentary you have in the syllabus, it's called Ecumenopolis. You can also Google it. And I will also join you to the CMS platform where you will have everything, because it's already like all the texts are already there because they are there since the last 2 years. So if you want to start reading David Harvey, please go on. But this week we're starting lightly and we're starting with documentary. As usual, you can just, I mean, these questions I have in the last slide of the lecture, they're just to sort of spark your reflection. If you want to write me your reflection about the documentary, not answering these questions, this is perfectly fine. So I want to read your thoughts, which you got after you saw the documentary. These questions are not obligatory for answering. You can, but if you want to have like, to answer the question, you can pick one, you can pick two, you can answer 3 of them. But please do not write me long answers. They might be even like in a form of small comments. So do not spend much time on these written answers. Usually you remember from half a page to a page, but not more than a page. Please, I don't want to work a lot. Because, you know, when you send me 2 pages, I will read them because it's me. Like, I cannot just like give you a mark or just like ignore your answer. But these 2 pages, it's like 20 minutes apart from 10 minutes, or like 10 minutes apart from 5 minutes of my time. So please, 1 page maximum. And in the end of the course, I'm expecting you to develop a group project and write an individual essay. But we're going to talk about this later because we're running out of time. And as usual, I have to say it, I know that you know it, but zero tolerance to plagiarism. I don't know how to read this word. Anyway, you got me. If I see that you translated something, I don't know, from Ukrainian to English. Yeah, by the way, I kindly ask you to write in English. It's not for me, it's for you. I mean, you see, My English is not perfect, but I stopped learning English like 5 years ago, and I do not care about it being. I'm like Slavoj Žižek, and I don't really care. But you need to practice your written skills because it's a foreign language for you. But what is important, I do not evaluate your your grammar. My grammar in English is so bad you cannot even imagine. So I'm not evaluating you in any way in your English skills. It's not even a question. Even if you like write really bad, but your idea is great. You're still gonna get 100. So, but please try to write in English. It's super important skill, especially for those who then plan to study abroad. Because, for example, some of your classmates from the previous year, they used the essays they wrote to my course to then apply to their master programs, and actually I think some of them are successful, not sure. Anyway, yeah, so it's a good practice. It's a good chance to practice not only your oral English but also your written English. I'm not gonna proofread your texts, but if there are some like obvious mistakes in English, I will try to correct them. But also don't expect my English to be perfect. It's understandable. I am happy with it. Yeah. Questions. And if like, I'm still worried that sometimes you do not understand me. You read Harvey about neoliberalism, but I did not give you. Yes, so Harvey has this great. It's a book, but it's an essay about history. No, it's a book about history. Yeah, so please, if you listen to the lecture and you do not understand what I'm saying, please write in the chat, because even also for Chloe, if my accent is not clear, also like write, or could you repeat, or you know. Yeah, I remember that some of my so I had a couple of exchange students from the UK when I was teaching in Milan, and after the class, after one semester in Italy, they worsened their English. So that's what might happen to you, that after a semester with us, you will start speaking like this, and then your friends in the UK will not understand you, but it's fine. Also, you know, English is not only the British one, it's international. Yes, I'm gonna register you on CMS by myself, because if you do it on your own, then if you delete yourself from CMS, I lose all your papers, and then I might get in trouble with the administration. So today I will, maybe tomorrow, I will put you on CMS, but I'm planning to do it today. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, I'm not gonna bother you with any more funny stories or not funny. I will try to put this lecture on YouTube, at least maybe the voice, or maybe it would be nice to make like a nice slideshow. Okay, I will think what to do with it, so you also can, you know, use it when preparing for the exam. But we do not have exam. Yeah, by the way, it's an exam like for the UKU students. So it's not the Zalik, it's the exam course. But as usual, we don't have any exam. We have just the group project. Not just, like our exam is group project and written essay. Okay. All other questions, either via email or on Thursday, not Tuesday, Thursday, четвер. Thank you so much. I'm so happy that we're back. Even it's still summer, but yeah. Okay, ciao. Have a nice day. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Have a nice
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Марічка, ти знаєш, що у нас буде ще якась пара зараз? Алло, Марічка, Герасим. Ясно.
Толік, ти ще тут?